Before we understood evolution, before we decoded insect behavior, before we even knew how to properly name species, there were a few men who changed everything. Born in 1707 in Sweden, Carl Linnaeus grew up in a small village where his father's garden sparked a lifelong obsession with plants. While other students struggled through Latin and theology, Linnaeus saw patterns in nature. As a young man at Uppsala University, he lived in poverty, but his brilliance stood out. In 1732, he traveled through Lapland, cataloging plants, animals, and cultures few scientists had documented before. Then came his breakthrough. In 1735, he published Systema Naturae, introducing a revolutionary idea. Every species should have a two-part name, genus and species. Simple, universal, timeless. Before, Linnaeus's scientific names were long, confusing descriptions. After him, biology had order. By the time he died in 1778, Linnaeus had classified thousands of species and laid the foundation for modern taxonomy. Nearly 300 years later, every scientist on Earth still speaks the language he created. But one of Linnaeus' students would go even further. Johann Christian Fabricius believed insects needed deeper study, not just surface traits, like wings. He focused on something revolutionary, mouthparts of the insects. He realized that feeding structures revealed evolutionary relationships, predators, nectar feeders, parasites, their mouthparts told a story. Fabricius described over 10,000 insect species, becoming one of the most important entomologists in history. If Linnaeus built the foundation, Fabricius refined the architecture. He helped establish entomology as a serious, independent scientific discipline. Fabricius died in 1808. Leaving behind one of the largest scientific legacies in early insect classification. Then came the idea that changed biology forever: evolution. Charles Darwin was born on February 12, 1809, in Shrewsbury, England, into a wealthy and well-educated family. His father, Robert Darwin, was a doctor, and his mother, Susanna Wedgwood, came from the famous Wedgwood pottery family. From an early age, Darwin was curious about nature and showed a love for collecting things like insects, minerals, and plants. As a young man, Darwin was obsessed with beetles. He collected them passionately, sometimes even putting one in his mouth to avoid losing a rare specimen. But his greatest contribution wasn't taxonomy. In 1859, on The Origin of Species Reshaped Science, natural selection explained why insects were so diverse, why beetles radiated into hundreds of thousands of forms, why pollinators and flowers evolved together. Darwin turned classification into a dynamic story, not just a list of names. Insects were no longer fixed creations. They were products of deep time. Charles Darwin died on April 19, 1882, at the age of 73, in Dow, Kent, England, where he had lived for much of his later life. His death came after years of chronic illness, which had troubled him since his 20s and included fatigue, digestive issues, and heart problems. Charles Darwin is buried in Westminster Abbey, London, England. He was interred in the Scientist's Corner, near other great figures such as Isaac Newton and John Herschel, in recognition of his groundbreaking contributions to science. In a small village in France in 1823, a poor boy named Jean-Henri Fabre grew up surrounded by fields, insects, and wild countryside. He had little formal education and no wealthy background, but he had something powerful: curiosity. Fabre taught himself science while working as a schoolteacher, studying insects not in laboratories, but in the open fields under the sun. Instead of dissecting dead specimens, he watched living insects for hours, even years, documenting their behavior with incredible patience. He studied wasps, beetles, and spiders, uncovering astonishing instinct-driven behaviors that challenged what scientists thought they knew. His 10-volume masterpiece, Souvenirs Entomologiques, transformed insect study into both science and art.
History celebrates the battlefields whereon we meet our death, but scorns to speak of the ploughed fields whereby we thrive. It knows the names of the king's bastards, but cannot tell us the origin of wheat. This is the way of human folly.
After his death on October 11, 1915, he was buried in the cemetery of Sérignan-du-Comtat, and his grave at that site is still maintained there. Linnaeus gave insects names. Fabricius refined their classification. Darwin explained their origins. Fabre revealed their behavior. Together, they transformed insects from overlooked creatures into one of the most important groups in biological science. And today, every entomologist, whether studying ants, beetles, scorpions, or butterflies, builds on their legacy. The next time you see an insect, remember its name, its form, its evolution, and its behavior were unlocked by these pioneers.